I think we're fashionably enough late now, so it's probably safe to begin. My name's Judith Brower, and on behalf of the Popcorn Forum Commission and the Division of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, I'm glad to welcome you here this morning. We have a couple of preliminary announcements that Tony's asked me to make. First of all, in this room following Tom's presentation, there will be about a half-hour video on the 25-year history of the Popcorn Forum, and anyone who's free and wants to see what's gone on in the 25 years that you've missed if you're 19 years old, or if you haven't been here every year for 25 years, or if you have been, that video will take about a half hour. I hear it's quite good, and we'd enjoy seeing it. Also, tomorrow, as one of the festivities around campus, you may have noticed in the advertisement that the machine shop folks are going to make, or are making medallions that are souvenirs of the 25th anniversary of the Popcorn Forum. And they'll be available as a complimentary gift to anyone who drops by the machine shop tomorrow in the Headland Building, first floor, between 7 and 4. Some will have holes punched in them if you want it for a keychain. You can have it either way if you just want it to mount or to use some way or other. So tomorrow between 7 and 4, after you've gone and found where the phyllo pastries are and where culinary arts is indulging us and where the other fun things are that are going on, somewhere in there stop in the machine shop. I'll repeat this afterwards, but Tom Farley will be available in the cider building between 10:30 and 11:45 if anyone wants to continue the discussion. We'll have some rooms posted over there where we will be. That's due to the crowded nature. We'll be shifting in the middle of things. But if something piques your interest and you want to pursue that further with Tom, at 10:30 we'll be in Cider 208 on the second floor of the cider building, and then there'll be directions wherever else we'll be after that. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this opportunity to broaden our own understandings of what mathematics is and what mathematics is about. Tom, I'm delighted to welcome you back to Coeur d'Alene. Tom has served the state of Idaho for the past 9 years as the mathematics education consultant for the State Department of Education. Tom is a native Idahoan, grew up in a farm around Wilder. We let him into the north, but anyway. And after spending some time in the military, Tom was telling me yesterday, he spent 3 semesters at the College of Idaho in Caldwell. Well, it was the College of Idaho then, now Albertsons trains clerks there. No, I'm sorry, it's Albertsons College now. And as Tom said, he majored in alcohol and girls and flunked both. He then tried the other end of the state, and he spent 3 semesters at an illustrious, prestigious Idaho higher education institution, receiving his associate's degree in 1968 from North Idaho College. So we welcome him back as an alumnus. His wife is also an NIC graduate. They graduated in 1968. He was showing me yesterday where he first foisted himself upon her over in the sub, and she thought, what a clod. Anyway, they got married that summer that they graduated. Since then, in the educational area, Tom's earned a bachelor's degree in mathematics and geology from LCSC and a master's in education from the University of Idaho, where he's also done some doctoral work. Tom has worked in the field of education in Idaho in a variety of positions. I don't want to say the most illustrious was the sane decision to be a football coach, but he's done that and coached track. He taught at Kootenai High School in Harrison, doing substituting, and I think one of his former students is around today trying to track him down. He taught for 15 years in Orofino. He also served there as the principal of Orofino High School and the math science curriculum coordinator for their district. I know Tom personally, and I know he has a far-reaching set of interests. And today we're privileged to have you, Tom, share your richness with us in this week in which we're examining the richness of human activities and how our many human activities interrelate. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce you, Tom, and your audience to one another, because I know the dialogue will be mutually enjoyable. I give you Tom Farley.
Good morning. Can Everybody here, is this working? Kurt, can you hear that all right? Yeah, good. You haven't lost your hearing with your age, is that okay? I realize that I'm a little bit shy on size, so I wore this tie so you'd be sure and see me up here. Those of you who have a fear of mathematics, probably one of the problems that you may be involved in your mind and in your heart is understanding the intricacies of mathematics, understanding estimation, measurement, proportion, and that type of thing. And most people I know don't understand proportion because they look at me as being fat. I'm not fat, I'm just too short. If I was 6'4", I would be skinny. At any rate, it is an honor for me to be here this morning and speak with you. I think it's an absolute tribute to you to take this time out of your important schedules and participate in a very fabulous activity that takes place on this campus, your Popcorn Forum. And it is an honor for me to be a part of the 25th anniversary. I know that a true Renaissance person in my mind is a person that learns for the sake of learning. And once that takes place, once learning takes place, then a person is better able to make connections and better able to see the meaningfulness and the usefulness of what it is that they have learned. And I think there is real joy in that. So any way that we can bring a connectedness together and what it is that we are all about, I think the better off we are. I want to share some overheads with you today and talk with you a little bit about mathematics, a little bit about the history of mathematics, the direction of mathematics, and where mathematics might take you, and of course its relationship to our lives. So I have Judith to thank for the first couple of overheads here. I really do believe that they send a message. A mathematician is a maker of patterns. The patterns, like the painters or the poets, must be beautiful. The ideas, like the color of the words, must fit together in a harmonious way. Beauty is the final test. There is no permanent place in the world for ugly mathematics. And I think that is very much true. And by the time we're through here this morning, I think you, if you don't already have a good grasp, you'll have a better grasp of what mathematics is today, the role it has played in the development of our culture, our society, and where it'll take us in terms of the 21st century. One of the things that we must do in mathematics is we must expand our understanding of what mathematics is. I think that is extremely important. Our musicians, our artists, our writers, I believe, are fabulous mathematicians. There's no doubt in my mind. It has been said in history that the true artist, the true musician, is indeed a mathematician. And I think those of you who understand the intricacies of both recognize that. The problem is particularly in today's society, is our children, of which you once were not taught to make those connections. You've not been put in an environment where you could make those connections. Quite frankly, what we've done is we've confused competency in arithmetic with competency in mathematics. And there is a great big difference. That does not mean that one is less important than the other. It does not mean that one is more important than the other. Because certainly competency in arithmetic is extremely necessary to be productive and successful in today's world. But if we are going to prepare ourselves for the 21st century, it is necessary for us to broaden and expand our understanding of what mathematics really is. As we continue to make those connections, we know the chief forms of beauty are order and symmetry and precision, which the mathematical sciences demonstrate in a very special degree. We know that to be the case. Once literacy in mathematics, enumeracy, that is the vocabulary that has been coined for literacy in mathematics, once that has been achieved, then there becomes a broader understanding of mathematics. And you are much better able to make those connections to real life so that you can see relevancy in what it is that you study and what it is that you learn in terms of mathematics. How many of you in here right now have math anxiety? Go ahead, raise your hand. Why do you suppose that is? Think for a moment why you suppose that is. Let's take the concept of calculus just for a moment. Some of our best calculus students are these little rugrats that are 4, 5, 6 years old. But first of all, we have to understand, what is calculus? What is the basic tenets of the study of calculus? It's the study of maximums and minimums, basically speaking. And we know very well that when a child walks through the door, or when an adult walks through the door, they begin to look around and they begin to make comparisons. That's bigger, that's smaller, that's shorter, that's longer, that's more, that's less. And what we have done is we've convinced about 50% of our children, by the time they're in the 4th grade, that that isn't what mathematics is. Mathematics is that column of problems on page 67, and you're going to do the odd ones today, knowing full well you're going to do the even ones tomorrow. And the reason you do the odd ones today is because the answers are in the back of the book. And that kind of gets you started. Yes, that is an important facet of the study of mathematics. There's no doubt about that. There needs to be drill. There needs to be some rote memorization. There needs to be a development and the skill in reciting facts. But quite frankly, it becomes useless if you cannot put it together to form thoughts that help you make your decisions. Just to start us off a little bit here, we will take a practical application of mathematics. The Greek mathematician Apollonius in 200 BC came up with his 400 propositions. The reason I share this with you is because as a math teacher, one of my favorite topics in mathematics is conic sections. And so I'm somewhat well versed with Apollonius. When you took a math course from me, I'll guarantee you when you got through math analysis or the later stages of Algebra 2, you knew your conic sections. You may not have known anything else, but you knew your conic sections. Because I enjoy that, and teachers have a tendency to teach what they enjoy. And teachers have a tendency to teach the way they've been taught. And that goes for parents. They are our first teachers. But here are a set of concepts that were developed 200 years before the birth of Christ. What application does that have to us today? I'll leave that up there a little longer so while I give you the gibberish, you might want to read the whole thing. While we're right here, and before we go on with some modern-day application of this, let's talk a little bit about the history of mathematics. Let's kind of branch out a little bit. We have mentioned calculus already. Where does calculus come from? Well, let's make some connections here. We know that at one time mankind were basically hunters and gatherers, and there come a time when they become hunters or become farmers and become people that domesticated wildlife, so on and so forth. Once that began to happen, the brain began to develop. Had to develop because of the competitive nature. We also know that there had to be a means for the farmer, the agriculturalist, to keep track of crops, the amount of grain, the amount of corn, the number of goats, the number of sheep, the seasons, and so on and so forth, so that they knew when the Nile was going to flood and when it was time to plant and when it was time to harvest and so on and so forth. From this, we get a lot of our background in mathematics. Of course, some of the great researchers come out of these times. Let's talk about the word calculus. How did people keep track of their possessions, particularly the numbers of their possessions? Well, they piled up little stones. And they soon figured out that, well, you know, once I get a pile of 10, I can kind of set it off to a side, and I can start another pile. Kind of the beginnings of place value. But stone, the Latin word for stone, is calculus. I don't know if any of you have ever had a kidney stone. I've had 12 of them. You would think that they would pass through my body rather easily, but they don't. But the doctor always said, yes, there's a small calculi in there. Let's go one step further. The great libraries of Alexandria, the great banks of Alexandria. Where did we get the name counter? You know, kitchen counter? Kitchen counter? If you go into the back rooms of the great banks of Alexandria, what'd you find back there? You found the abacuses, where they kept track of the money, goings and comings. And as modern time progressed and the abacus went out the window, the counter was left. That's where we get the name, the word counter. We use it in our kitchen every day. Has absolutely nothing to do with the kitchen. It has to do with counting. It has to do with the table that the abacus sat on in the great banks of Alexandria. So as we go forward and talk a little bit about the practical application of conic sections, it is really, quite frankly, the only reason that a car headlight works. We know something about the distance between the focal point of a parabola and the curve, or a point on the curve, and the distance from that point on a curve to a line called the directrix. And we happen to know that if the filament is heated on the parabola, that all the light beams will diffuse parallel and bright through the lens of the headlight. We know that if the filament is heated off the parabola, then the light is diffused. The light beams do not travel parallel, and consequently the light is not as bright. The same concept works with the use of satellite dishes, parabolic satellite dishes. Why do we use them? How do we use them? One of the greatest experiences that a young child, and maybe even adult, if you're into that kind of thing, can have is to go into the Discovery Center in Boise, which is a hands-on science museum. And on one end of the building is a huge, old, painted yellow satellite dish. And on the other end of the building is another huge, old, yellow, painted satellite dish. And you can go stand in front of this satellite dish here and have your friend stand in front of that satellite dish down there and whisper. And he or she can hear you, because of the reflective properties that we know about parabolas, more specifically conic sections. Extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy. We know that in Germany they now have devised and did so quite some time ago, really. In the United States we now use lasers. But we know that the distance from the focal point to a point on the curve of an ellipse to the other focal point is a constant. We know that. So that if you shoot a beam of light through one focal point, reflect it off the surface of the ellipse, where will it pass? Where will it pass? It'll go right back through the other focal point. We can use that knowledge to immerse a patient in a tub of water such that the kidney stone is arranged, oriented over one focal point of an ellipsoid. At the other focal point is an electronic device that when juice is put to it, it emits a shock wave. What happens to those shock waves? They radiate throughout the ellipsoid, they reflect off the surface of the ellipsoid, and where do they go? They go to the other focal point. We already established that, and we can do it mathematically by formula, or we can demonstrate it physically. At any rate, what's at the other focal point? The kidney stone. It's gone. It's dissolved. So the application to medicine, something that I rather doubt if there is anyone in this room right here that hasn't had someone in their family that has not been afflicted with a kidney stone. I've had to have one removed surgically. I don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to worry about it. The application of medicine. Most folks don't know how the reflective telescope works. We know that one lens is hyperbolic. We know that one lens is parabolic. We know that there is a lens opposite one focal point of an ellipse, and your eye is at the other focal point of the ellipse, the lens you look through, which is why all of the reflective properties of these three conic sections are incorporated into the architecture of the reflective telescope. So we have an application there, and we still haven't got away from just talking about Apollonius's 400 propositions 200 years before the birth of Christ. Probably the most obvious use of conic sections that we see as we drive down our nation's highways is hyperbolic cooling towers for nuclear reactors. Why are those cooling towers hyperbolic? Because you can get the same volume of water with a larger surface area. Cools the water more rapidly. One of my favorite writings dealing with mathematics, it's called Smart. Bear with me as I read it to you, not because you don't know how to read, but because I like to give emphasis here and there in some of the things that we discuss. My dad gave me a $1 bill because I'm his smartest son, and I swapped it for 2 shiny quarters because 2 is more than 1. And then I took the quarters and traded them to Lou for 3 dimes. I guess he didn't know that 3 is more than 2. Just then, along came old blind Bates, and just because he can't see, he gave me 4 nickels for my 3 dimes, and 4 is more than 3. And I took the nickels to Hiram Coombs down at the seed feed store, and the fool gave me 5 pennies for them, and 5 is more than 4. And then I went and showed my dad, and he got red in the cheeks and closed his eyes and shook his head, too proud of me to speak. So we make a lot of assumptions about mathematics, and most of them are erroneous. We've already talked about the fact that we have confused competency in arithmetic with competency in mathematics. We must talk more about the fact, where am I going to use mathematics in my life? I'm constantly hearing from people, well, I took algebra when I was a freshman and I haven't used it since, and I'm 73 years old. The problem is, I'm thirsty. The problem is, and we continue to do this problem today, is whether it's algebra or geometry or any of the branches of higher mathematics, it is not taught or it is not learned, whatever the case may be, in such a way that a person recognizes those connections and the impact that it has on their lives. You use algebra every day of your life. If in no other way, you do by logical reasoning, organization, structure in your life, say nothing of what you might do in terms of figuring gas mileage, which a lot of us do. You go to the store and 3 loaves of bread for $1.29. How much is 1 loaf? That's no different than 3x equals 1.29. Divide both sides by 3 and you know what x is. Don't forget to substitute the bread back in for x. That type of thing. Now we'll get down to some facts of the matter. All the knowledge mankind has amassed from the dawn of time to 1980 doubled in the 1980s. We know that. We also know that all the knowledge that we now have, including mathematics, science, and technology, doubles every 900 days. And we also know that within 5 years, it is expected to double every 400 days. Excuse me. In some areas of today's world, It's doubling every 100 days. When you begin to talk about what's happening with genome mapping, genetic engineering, the research that is done in space and in medicine and technology, some of it is doubling every 100 days. I got so mad here about 3 weeks ago that I could just spit nails. I almost had apoplexy. I bought myself a new computer for my office, and the computer gurus from downstairs come down and hooked it all up. They're the ones that sent in the order for it. I got a 486 with an HP laser printer and all those nice things. And what did the guy say to me? Farley, what's the matter with you? This thing's obsolete. I said, well, it's not my fault it took 6 weeks for it to get here. If you go to Hewlett Packard in Boise right now, if you go to Micron in Boise right now, and you go out there and talk to them about the rapid changes in technology, they will tell you that 60% of their employees that take a 3-week vacation, when they return, they have to be retrained. That's how fast it's changing. So, let's take a look at Calvin and Hobbes here. Calvin says, Miss Wormwood, I have a question about this math lesson. Yes? Given that sooner or later we're all just going to die, what's the point of learning about integers? Turn to page 83, class. And of course, Calvin says, nobody likes us big picture people. That is one thing our society today must have, is a bigger picture, a bigger vision, a bigger view of the role of mathematics in our lives. We need to understand, folks, that we're not going to go back to the 50s and 60s. We need to understand that in the 50s and the 60s, the United States of America was the only country on the face of the earth that had anything left that could build something. The rest of the world had been destroyed by war. And we functioned very well in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s because we could produce anything we wanted, and we could produce it in any quantity or quality. And our schools produced the workers that could meet those demands. It's not that the American education system is doing a bad job, folks. It's not that we don't know our math, or we can't read, or we don't understand scientific inquiry. It's the rest of the world has caught up with us. It is just exactly like a football team. Just because over a period of time your football team or your basketball team or your music group or your choir begins to compete on a level with somebody down the road that has been domineering over time, doesn't mean they're getting worse. You're getting better. And that's the race that the United States of America is in today. We are competing now with the rest of the world, when not long ago there wasn't much competition, period. We know that the world today is computer driven. We know that there is a considerable emphasis on thinking and reasoning. We need to find new ways of doing things, deal with floods of new information. Knowledge is doubling every 900 days. We know that. We need to be able to work in groups as well as individually. If you go to Hewlett Packard in Boise, Idaho right now, and I only speak of that because I happen to have and I talk about Hewlett Packard because I do a lot of work with them, and I have a brother-in-law that works there. He doesn't really have a boss. He works for a team. And they have a team leader, and they decide who that is. Use math to increase everyone's options. One of the problems with mathematics, folks, is we have used it to filter people out, and we've used it too long, because we need to increase our pool of literate mathematicians and mathematics literate people in this society if we intend on meeting the needs of the 21st century. We know by the year 2000, that's not far from now, we know by the year 2000 there will be 500,000 jobs that don't even exist today. We know that. That will require a high competency in mathematics, scientific inquiry capability, and technology. We know that. We know that. but yet we continue to ostracize girls and minorities in the math and science fields because we are traditionally so used to the concept of white males dominating mathematics and science because they always have, and we've gotten along fine. And we did. We did. When Sputnik went up, what did we do? We ran out into the streets and we blamed the schools for the failure of our math and science and losing the space race. We're not producing enough mathematicians. We're not producing enough scientists. We shall go out into the hinterlands and we will find these math and science people and we will develop programs to promote them. Who'd we find? And who'd we promote? Predominantly white males. I am told by the year 2000, just for us to meet the engineering needs of this country, 95% of all white males will have to major in engineering. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I spent 2 weeks in October in Russia doing school evaluations. And one of the major things I found over there is the girls had no idea what I was talking about, fear of mathematics. They thought I was nuts. Excuse me. The other thing I found out was 90% of the engineers in Russia are female. I didn't know that. Most of the engineers in Russia are female. I found that to be kind of contradictory to what we do in this country. Kind of a nice cartoon, a math-phobic's nightmare. Okay, now listen up. Nobody gets in here without answering the following question. A train leaves Philadelphia at 1 p.m. It's traveling at 65 miles per hour. Another train leaves Denver at 4. Say, you need some paper? This is not all really far-fetched. This kind of study of mathematics, although it can be a part of the study of mathematics, probably is what's frustrated most of you that have math anxiety. Is that true? Raise your hand. Is that true? Yes, that's true. For one thing, it doesn't have any relevance. Another thing, it's very difficult for you to make a connection with real-life situations. And thirdly, nothing tells us that you can draw upon past experiences or past learning to get at the roots that are necessary to solve this problem. Actually, I really don't care. I can put this on a programmable graphing calculator, and I not only can tell you the answer to this type of a problem, I can even show you the trains moving on the screen of the calculator. That's how far we've come in being able to advance what we want people to know and be able to do in mathematics. The power of mathematics comes from an organized, logical, structured way of thinking. Do we have any artists in here? Do we have any artists in here? Would you say that that's what drives you in your artwork? Mm-hmm. Musicians? Do we have any musicians? Is that what drives you in music? I'm sure it is. How about writers? Do we have any writers? Yes. Is that what drives you? How many times have you put together a sentence and then a group of sentences for a paragraph and went back and changed it all around, shortened some, lengthened some, so on and so forth, until you got it based on your organized, logical, structured way of thinking, got it to say what you want it to say. Mathematics is a way of thinking. It has an alphabet. It is a language. It is. The number system is no different than our alphabet. And for the future, it'll be a powerful language. There isn't any doubt about that. We know that mathematics is all around us. We take it for granted. It's in the structure and the architecture of this building. the acoustics of this building. These acoustical tiles and the work that has been done for acoustics are where they are for a particular purpose and for a particular reason, and I'll guarantee you 99% of it come about because of mathematics. It is in the beauty of what it is that we look at. It is in the pattern of the clothes that you're wearing. It is in the development of the patterns of the clothes that you're wearing. Also helps you figure out how much you got coming on your paycheck. We know that mathematics allows us to explain things in a logical, organized, structured way, even if we're not talking about mathematics. We just got through doing that. It allows us to compare things, to measure things, to estimate, to evaluate, and in general quantify. And probably in the end, qualify. Mathematics does train the mind. In my days of a mathematics teacher, and I'm the first to admit, the first 3 or 4 years I taught mathematics, they should have fired me. They should have. I don't make no bones about that. I did an awfully good job of babysitting, and the best and the brightest and the elitist of all students did well. And they're going to do well in spite of us. I firmly believe that. But the students that really required my undivided attention and the best of my capabilities, which really had not been fostered and had not evolved by that time, didn't get it. They didn't get it. But once I made that turn, once I made that transition, I explained to the kids right up front, first day of school, what I am here for is to train your mind. I want you to be a real Renaissance person. I want to get your mind such that you can challenge anything you wish. I just happen to be the person in this school that's going to use mathematics to do it. We've got a teacher right down the street that's going to use language arts. We've got another one right down the hall here that's going to use art. One over here is going to use music. And yes, the football coach is going to use football. Of course, I was a football coach, so that worked out pretty well. But I know one thing. When you talk about coaching, those are the type of people that you really want to model in your classroom. You want to model their teaching technique. You may not want to model them as a person. That's up to you. But they themselves model. They motivate. They cause the students to demonstrate what it is they know and what it is they're able to do with that knowledge and that ability. They may not go back to the classroom and practice that. I don't know. We'll make any decision about that. But I do know that they do the kinds of things that we need to do with kids in the classroom. What is mathematics beyond number analysis? It's the ability to explore, conjecture, and reason logically. Solve non-routine problems, communicate about and through mathematics. Connect ideas within mathematics, between mathematics, and other intellectual activities. That really is what mathematical power is all about. That is that next level, that transition from arithmetic. That better enables you to make the connections with the other academic and intellectual activities. Consequently, the vision of mathematics in today's age, first of all, we must realize that mathematics is something one does. We've all heard the old adage that if you do something, you better understand it. And that's what we need to do with all of us, myself including, even the world's greatest mathematicians, is we need to do mathematics, solve problems, communicate, reason. I got to my motel room here a couple of days ago, turned on the TV to sit down and relax a little bit after driving 400 miles, and the first thing on the TV was a commercial. And the commercial immediately alluded to, well, I'm a graduate of DeVry University. And now I'm an engineer for Ford or Chrysler, I don't know who it was. No, I think it was Saturn, car company. I went to DeVry University because they made me a creative problem solver. There are problems, whether they are social or whether they are in communication or in the arts. There are problems that we are going to constantly want to solve. I'm a believer that competency in mathematics helps you better solve those problems. Calvin and Hobbes. I'm not going to do my math homework. Look at these unsolved problems. Here's a number in mortal combat with another. One of them is going to get subtracted, but why? How? What will be left of him? If I answered these, it would kill the suspense. It would resolve the conflict and turn the intriguing possibilities into boring old facts. I never really thought about the literary qualities of math. I prefer to savor the mystery. Definitely true. Definitely true. So let's take a step back in time and bring it forward. Leonardo of Pisa, nicknamed Fibonacci, wrote a particular well-known work, Liber Abaci, and actually helped introduce the familiar number system into Western culture. How many of you have studied any of Fibonacci and any number analysis or any of those types of things? Let's take a look at where he leads us. First of all, let's just remember each number in the sequence is the sum of the previous two numbers. You need to remember that. If you choose any two successive numbers in the sequence, and I just happen to choose 55 and 89, their ratio, converted to a decimal, will be approximately 0.618. And I want you to remember that. Remember that number, 0.618. This is called the golden ratio. The divine ratio comes out of the discussions about the golden rectangle, which we'll discuss a little bit more. What it basically says is a rectangle, the most pleasing to the eye, is one where the short side to the long side equals the short side, or the long side to the sum of the short and the long. And I've done it with all kinds of different numbers, and indeed, it's going to have to approximate 0.618. So let's remember that number. We know, one more time, that we know that Fibonacci numbers, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, so on and so forth. We have a sense of each number in that sequence. Let's just, for the fun of it, take a look at this. We can take the first 6 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. We could use any 6 numbers if we wanted to, but we'll take the first 6. We can do a 1 by 1 square, another 1 by 1 square, a 2 by 2 square, a 3 by 3 square, a 5 by 5 square, an 8 by 8 square. We could go on and do a 13 by 13, so on and so forth. If we take those squares and put them together, it'll look something like this. We can stack the 1 by 1 over the 1 by 1, but adjacent up to it, a 2 by 2, and then a 3 by 3, and a 5 by 5, and so on and so forth, where it begins to look like this. If we would go from opposite corner or opposite vertice to opposite vertice, we begin to see something that looks like this. We end up with, I just call it a Fibonacci spiral. You can see how that is done. And I think you probably recognize this without too much difficulty. It's the same spiral that we find in the Nautilus seashell. So we've begun to take a mathematical sequence developed by some old joker way back when that didn't have anything else to do but study numbers. And this is where it's taken us. Fibonacci numbers in art and architecture. They've had a curious influence on art and architecture. Back to the golden rectangle as an example. Anybody give any thought as to why we have 3 by 5 file cards? 5 by 8 file cards? or why the size of the covers on a light switch are the size they are, so on and so forth? Has it dawned on you, and I'm sure it has, so far all we've talked about are Fibonacci numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, so on and so forth. We know that there's been considerable study done by different people of the pyramids. We know that the ratio of the height of the pyramids to the base, diameter, or the diagonals, so on and so forth. Many relationships. When you put the ratios together, they come out to be Fibonacci numbers. We know that much research has been done on crosses where the ratio of this short to the whole thing is a Fibonacci number. Did they plan that? Fibonacci numbers in music. We know that there are 8 white keys, 5 black keys. Black keys are positioned in groups of 2 and 3. 13 keys altogether is 1 octave. 13 notes belong to the chromatic scale. We can talk about the pentatonic scale, the 8-note diatonic scale. Are we all right with the musicians? We know that the keys on a piano are arranged in the Fibonacci sequence. We know that. So now we've related a very simple little sequence. We've talked a little bit about it in nature. We've talked a little bit about it in architecture. We've now related it to music. This is kind of a fun activity. This is a real paradox here. You take a square. Many of you have seen this. I like to give it to my math students. An 8 by 8 square, and you could use any time you want to, and it'll still work. But an 8 by 8 square, and divide it such that you can take the parts apart and put it back together and form a triangle. We know that an 8 by 8 square has an area of 64. Is that true? Yeah. We also know that if you take these parts apart, put it back together to form this triangle, we end up 1/2 the base times the height. Half the base is 5. The height's 13. 5 times 13 is 65. Suddenly you end up with 1 square unit larger than you started with. Kind of like me. Isn't it rather strange that 3, 5, and 8, and 1, and 13 are all Fibonacci numbers? We have just barely touched on research and all the fun that you can have with Fibonacci numbers. A final overhead, the apparent link between nature's proportions and the proportions are found in art and architecture. We know that the Milky Way, the galaxy, is in a Fibonacci spiral. We know that. We know that the curl in a ram's horn is in a Fibonacci spiral. We know that the seeds in a pine cone and a sunflower seed head are arranged in a Fibonacci spiral. We know that ocean waves, which are continuous, form a Fibonacci spiral. The tail of a seahorse, the dried leaf of a poinsettia, the nautilus. All of these relationships of the Fibonacci number system to our life in the real world. We've talked about Fibonacci numbers in music, Fibonacci numbers in art, Fibonacci numbers in nature. Mathematics is a part of our lives. It should be an integral part of our lives. It should not be taken for granted. And one of the major nemesis we have is the fear of mathematics. And we've brought it upon ourselves. It is not the nature of mathematics itself, but what we have either done with it or not done with it. I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your personal, your school, and your community's lives and your endeavor to seek intellectual prowess. And in closing, I leave you with one thought, and it's from a quote of a person that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and it's one of my favorite quotes, and that is, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. After all, that is the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. You are a small group of people, but you have large hearts, you have large minds, and you have large ambitions. And I wish you all the luck in fulfilling them, and I thank you very much. It has been my honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. In these days that are not always easy in the State Department of Education, we're glad that you're helping lead one whole aspect of education in our lives. Thank you for reminding us that in order to read the universe, the signs of our times, and the problems of our lives, we need to know the alphabet. Galileo said that mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. Thank you for reminding us of some of those letters.
You're very welcome.
A reminder, tomorrow, get your medallion, 7 to 4, Mechanical Arts Building, and there'll be a video in here from 10 to 10:30 on the Popcorn Forum, and Tom will be available with slides, with ideas to continue any discussion anybody would like to in the Cider Building, beginning at 10:30.